Connaissance, recherche, sciences,
mathématiques,
théorie,
physique,
philosophie,
conférence,
archéologie,
nature.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the colloque to have invited me. It's my great honor, and I am likewise very embarrassed that I must present in English and not in French, and I thank you in advance for your patience. I would like to begin my talk with a quotation from an admirer of Darwin, not mentioned so far, and that is Leon Trotsky, writing in the ABC Materialist Dialectics in 1939, and this is what he writes. We call our dialectic materialist because its roots are in objective reality, in nature. Consciousness grew out of the unconscious, psychology out of physiology, the organic world out of the inorganic. The dialect of thinking, having grown out of the dialect of nature, therefore possesses a thoroughly materialist character. Darwin is the highest triumph of the dialectic of the whole field of organic matter. Darwin's potential as a dialectical materialist of the mind has been generally ignored since Trotsky. The situation has recently changed, however, and this is my subject. I will be less concerned with Darwin than with Darwinism. To be more exact, with a specific version of Neo-Darwinism initiated by the evolutionary biologist John Maynard Smith, who died, I think, 2 years ago. When I say Neo-Darwinism, this is the version to which I refer. Neo-Darwinism begins with an effort to interpret Darwin's ideas in terms of population genetics, game theory, and cost-benefit analysis. And now, social neuroscience has been made part of this mix. Maynard Smith was well acquainted with Marx's dialectic. He had been a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain until the Soviet invasion of Hungary in 1956. Eventually, he also rejected Marx and his dialectic on very interesting grounds. And the grounds were that Marx had failed to understand human nature. That is to say that Marx had been insufficiently materialist, unlike Darwin. In an article titled Reconciling Marx and Darwin, which he does not, published in 2001, Maynard Smith writes as follows: "A fundamental of Marx's theory of history is contained in his thesis that man's social being determines his consciousness. This is a historicist theory. It excludes the possibility that the human mind is the expression of the human brain, and that because the brain is the product of evolutionary biology, human consciousness is likewise shaped and constrained by biology, specifically by genes. Because Marx's dialectical vision is anti-reductionist and blind to the biological determinants of human nature, it is also tragically flawed. And this explains the manifest failure of Marxism when adopted as a guide to organizing society." End of his quote. Given Maynard Smith's hostility to dialectical history, it is ironical that his innovations, the introduction of game theory, population genetics, cost-benefit analysis, and I would add social neuroscience, has laid the foundation for a new dialectic of history, a Neo-Darwinian dialectic, in which human nature, the human mind, and the social brain co-evolve through a series of contradictions. Each contradiction comes into existence as a resolution to a pre-existing contradiction. My talk is divided into two unequal parts. Part one describes the Neo-Darwinian dialectic and how it emerged, and part two describes the failure to find a plausible resolution to its final contradiction, a resolution or a synthesis that reduces emergent human nature to evolving biological mechanisms. Part one. The Neo-Darwinian dialectic begins with the puzzle of altruism, which is defined by the Neo-Darwinians as behavior that transfers some or all of the altruist's reproductive potential to some beneficiary, most obviously in self-sacrifice. Altruism is a puzzle because it gives the non-altruist recipients, the people who lack altruism genes, a reproductive advantage. Non-altruists should eventually outbreed altruists, and gene-driven altruism should eventually decline and then disappear. This does not happen, and that is the puzzle. W.D. Hamilton solved the puzzle in 1964 with his theory of kin selection. It says that altruistic behavior has favorable reproductive cost benefits when the beneficiaries are closely related to the altruist, the self-sacrificer. Thus, altruism genes will be preserved in the group's genome, if not in the body of the altruist. But there are populations in which altruistic behavior persists even though altruists and beneficiaries are either completely unrelated or so distantly related that kin selection must be ruled out. Robert Trivers, in 1971, explained that these situations are sustainable if altruism is reciprocal. That is to say, if the recipient eventually repays the altruist. Reciprocity occurs amongst non-human primates as habitual and symmetrical behavior, but it is typically restricted to grooming and occasionally food sharing among individuals living in close proximity. And the interval between gift giving and repayment is characteristically very brief, a few seconds in the case of capuchin monkeys, and only minutes in the case of chimpanzees. A more complex, memory-based kind of reciprocity evolved amongst hominid populations, that is to say our ancestors, during the Paleolithic period. This involved dispersed partners and long intervals between gifts and repayment. It eventually connected multiple local groups into extended social networks and coalitions, and represented the great leap forward in human social evolution. But memory-based reciprocity is cognitively demanding, and it presupposes the emergence of a new capacity, a capacity for mind reading. So long as altruism and reciprocity are confined to genetically homogeneous populations, cheating is impossible. There will be, of course, non-reciprocators, people who get and don't return, and their reproductive fitness will benefit from the costs that are being absorbed by the altruists. However, the costs and the benefits of the exchanges are always circulating within a single genome. So in a sense, it's paying itself back. And therefore, the term cheater is reserved by the Neo-Darwinians for genetically heterogeneous populations, where costs and benefits can accumulate within different lineages, circumstances characteristic only of memory-based reciprocity. And it is at this point that we encounter a contradiction. In heterogeneous populations, individuals strive to maximize their own reproductive interests and the interests of close kin. Therefore, cheaters are going to be inevitable. And because of their superior fitness they will outbreed the reciprocators, and the extended social system will eventually collapse. This eventuality is postponed, first by the evolution of positive sentiments that encourage reciprocity and that we so prize today: friendship, gratitude, sympathy, and so on. However, this is not a permanent solution. Mathematical modeling, game-playing experiments designed by economists, and ethnographic observations conducted in small-scale pre-industrial communities all confirm that positive sentiments would have been insufficient in the long run. What was needed was punishment. Punishment, the actual or threatened coercion of non-reciprocators by enforcers, is needed in order for these genetically heterogeneous social systems to stabilize our ancestors. And now, a further contradiction. Punishment is an irrational option for the enforcers because the reproductive cost of being an enforcer exceeds the benefits. Punishment consumes enforcers' resources, their energy, and can be very expensive if the cheaters decide to retaliate. In addition, reciprocators in the enforcer's own community who choose not to be enforcers become, in practice, without willing it, second-order cheaters, because they are getting the benefits of punishment cost-free. All expenses are being paid by the enforcers. Therefore, we would expect non-enforcers to eventually outbreed enforcers and the whole system to collapse. In other words, punishment can prevent entropy, but who, even our dim ancestors, who would have wanted to be an enforcer, especially when the rewards would have been uncertain and typically indirect? The evolutionary solution is that the enforcer's brain will pay itself back. The brain will pleasure itself by secreting dopamine and perhaps also oxytocin, while it, the enforcer's brain, anticipates and empathically imagines and experiences the cheater's suffering as he will eventually be punished. Well, this is not a nice story, and it gets much worse. As the Paleolithic period segues into the Neolithic, more complex forms of social integration emerge. The pleasures of empathic suffering are decoupled from altruistic punishment, and they evolve on their own into cruelty, spitefulness, and schadenfreude, gloating at someone else's misfortune. Well, I've just described for you the Neo-Darwinian perspective on empathy. The view that empathy is a product of a dialectical process intertwining the evolution of hominid nervous systems and social systems. Until now, I have been talking about the evolution side of the dialectic. Now, I describe the nervous system as it is represented in these Neo-Darwinian accounts. The dialectical process begins with mind reading. There is a consensus amongst experts that normal humans can read minds in the sense that they can infer intentions and successfully predict and manipulate the behavior of others. Opinion is divided regarding the basis of mind reading, however. An influential view in social neuroscience is that the human mirror neuron system and the human mind-reading capacity evolved together, along with the human capacity for empathy. I want to say a few words about what this mirror neuron system is and what mirroring is, or said to be. Mirroring is equivalent to experiencing someone else's situation through neuronal resonance. That is to say, matching activations in the brains of the observer and the person observed. Each mirror neuron functions simultaneously as a sensory neuron and a motor neuron. Researchers use the term representations when referring to mirror neuron activation. Thus, a mirror neuron produces a motor representation and a sensory or perceptual representation of what's being observed. Many philosophers of mind believe that representations are simultaneously representations of something, that is to say, they've got some content, but they are also and simultaneously representations for something. In other words, something somehow is reading these representations. For the reductionist, the reader must be the brain. Another way that social neuroscientists describe the brain's activity in this process is to say that it is experiencing its mirrored activation. The brain is experiencing its mirrored activation. And this will be my meaning when I use the phrase from this point on. The idea that the brain experiences its mirrored representations is the basis for the Neo-Darwinian, for the claim that the Neo-Darwinian dialectic is reductionist in Maynard Smith's sense. That mind reading is the work of the brain and biological mechanisms, that mind reading is not the work of the mind, which is no more than a ghost inside a machine, and therefore a departure from Maynard Smith's materialist program. Our earliest Australopithecine ancestors were capable of only two kinds of mirroring. One kind is spontaneous mimicry. You know, monkey sees, monkey does, evidenced amongst us humans today in emotional contagion, contagious yawning, and the so-called chameleon effect. In the second kind of mirroring that our ancestors had, acting out behavior is inhibited. Monkey sees and monkey brain experiences, but monkey, for some reason, does not perform the motor act. During the late Paleolithic, after the Australopithecines, long after them, with the emergence of anatomically modern humans and the eventual emergence of behaviorally modern humans, ancestors indistinguishable from us, hominid brains acquired the capacity to decouple mirrored representations. That is to say, the observer's mirror experience is transformed at this point into his first-person experience. This is what I see and I know. And this first-person experience is now projected back onto the observed individual to constitute the observer's third-person knowledge. These are his intentions. How does the brain infer the intentions responsible for its own mirrored activation pattern, its own experiencing? The answer to that very interesting question remains obscure, even now, 15 years after the original discovery of mirror neurons. What is made clear, however, is that during the Paleolithic, these remarkable developments, the emergence of self-awareness, self-projection, and perspective-taking, congealed into mind reading, or the mind reading capacity. The dialectical Neo-Darwinian in giving this account is constantly jumping back and forth between mental developments and neural developments. Here, too, the bridging mechanisms connecting mind and brain, or more specifically, reducing mind to brain, remain obscure. Interest in mind reading was stimulated by a puzzle to the researchers, the Neo-Darwinians, a puzzle referred to yesterday. And this is, And this is the puzzle that the hominid brain, over the course of the Paleolithic, quadrupled in volume. Now, this is interesting in a puzzle because the brain's metabolic cost increased proportionately. Initially, the brain paid for itself via adaptations between the organism and its physical environment. Eventually, however, the metabolic cost of growth exceeded the environmental benefits. And the puzzle? Why did the brain continue to expand? From now on, from this point on, the brain's history is about brains adapting to other brains and not to an external environment. That is to say, a ceaseless cognitive arms race facilitated by mind reading, as brains compete with brains. This is the point at which primitive forms of cheating, the simple refusal to reciprocate, evolved into a higher evolutionary stage, evolved into deception. The brain's effort to represent the current situation as something different from the reality. Now, deception is very interesting from an evolutionary perspective, evolution of the brain, because it places such great demands on the brain. Because the brain must be able to do at least two things simultaneously, which was not required to do before. It must construct a lie, and it must withhold the truth. There is abundant experimental and clinical evidence indicating that telling the truth is the brain's default response. And for this reason, Robert Rivers, whom I mentioned a moment ago, writes, "Successful deception then and now presumes a capacity for self-deception. A cheater is in constant danger of signaling the truth and betraying himself. A self-deceiver hides his intentions and facts first from himself and then proceeds effortlessly with his deception." Self-deception would have emerged during human evolution as a very novel kind of mirroring, because it's a mirroring between the actual self and an imagined self. It emerges after perspective taking and is a bridge to a later important development called mental time travel. Now, mental time travel sounds like science fiction, but it's not. Mental time travel refers to the capacity to project oneself, once we acquired a self, into alternative situations in the past, the future, and the subjunctive. Time travel to the past would have evolved first in the form of episodic or autobiographical memory. Episodic memory provided the raw material for constructing possible futures, and this ability would have facilitated behavioral flexibility in novel situations and would have facilitated the development of a long-term strategic plans tailored to specific goals. So movement back and forth between past and future would be also the evolutionary origin of time. That is to say, an awareness of continuity between past and future such that it now becomes possible for our hominid ancestors to imagine events, autobiographical and otherwise, along a continuum, time. Episodic memory comprises these four elements: what, where, when, and who. Thus, the co-evolution of language would have enhanced time travel and evolutionary fitness by enabling narratives of the past and the circulation and accumulation of memories within groups, that is, shared memories. Time travel to the future could now draw on a veritable library of memories within the community. The emergence of language, in addition, would have intersected time and space so that it would become possible to do what we take for granted today, to talk about time being long and short, time being cut into segments, time going from and to, and being in between. The human mirror neuron system, if it exists, brings a further meaning to mental time travel, for it means that time travelers might also experience alternative situations, not simply cognitively, but experientially. Numerous brain imaging experiments demonstrate this view of time travel. Time travel to the subjunctive means that the individual could now project himself into an explicitly imagined situation, rather than simply an anticipated situation. Participants in subjective time travel experiments today using functional neuroimaging are asked to imagine someone in a familiar emotive situation. Typically, they're asked to imagine someone experiencing pain. The mirrored someone can either be another anonymous person or the participant himself. When people are asked to imagine themselves in pain, in this subjunctive, and then to imagine another in pain, both equally activate the brain's pain matrix in the observer, a region that has been previously identified experimentally with individuals actually experiencing pain. On the other hand, the imagine yourself in pain task activates much higher levels of distress. The same lights light up, same regions light up, but much more intensely when people are asked to imagine themselves in distress. In other words, greater empathic tenderness is experienced for one's mirrored self than for mirrored others, even when the mirrored others are close relatives. Time travel is the source of the final dialectical contradiction. A memory, even a fragment of a memory, can spontaneously activate associated memories. Other memories of the past cascade, and also memories of the future and the subjunctive, the might have been memories. This idea about spontaneous associations is too widely accepted, especially in the land of Proust, to require elaboration. But what happens when memories of the past and future occur to an individual at the same time? Well, there's an interesting precedent for this phenomenon. During World War I, Fritz Kaufmann and Karl Abraham, then nerve doctors in the German army, describe cases of shell shock or fright neurosis as a disorder that is characteristically driven by what they called memories of the future. The soldier's vision, the stricken soldier's vision of the future, is a vision of his own death. And he experiences an extreme empathic tenderness for his imagined self. At the same time, he spontaneously recalls and re-experiences an episode in the recent past that resembles his imagined future. His neurosis, according to Kaufmann, is that he experiences these real and imagined memories as a single traumatic event that has already occurred and that is the cause of his current incapacitating shell shock symptoms. The neurotic's unconscious goal is quite obvious, is to evade the future. His true pathology is a weakness of will, a hybrid condition, both medical and moral, according to Kaufmann. The effective treatment is a regime of painful electric shocks, described by his patients as torture. Kaufmann despised Freud. Karl Abraham was a member of Freud's inner circle. But Kaufmann and Abraham reached a similar conclusion. Abraham diagnosed shell shock as a narcissistic neurosis. The individual is overwhelmed by his vision of the future and his exaggerated tenderness for the mirrored self. The memory of an imagined future merges with the memory of a true past. The situation is pathological, we are told, because a minimal distinction between self and other is essential for social interaction in general and for empathy in particular. This is the opinion today of respected neuroscientists. Is it true? I'm not so certain. However, one thing that is certain is that by isolating research participants inside a tube, the functional neuroimaging technology confirms that we experience just one self at a time. But the question that should be asked is, what is life like outside the tube? Concurrent encounters with mirrored selves do occur, but the consensus amongst experts in social neuroscience is that a fully awake, healthy brain has no great problem distinguishing reality and imagination. This, then, is the end of the dialectical road. Human nature is a bundle of capacities and inclinations that include dissimulation, self-deception, narcissism, spitefulness, schadenfreude, and cruelty. Our normative institutions and ideologies, secular humanism, Christian ethics, mainline moral discourse, etc., admonish us to despise and reject these attitudes because they are morally wrong, they're perverse, pathological, and antisocial. Popular behavioral and functionalist approaches to empathy describe empathy as something intrinsically pro-social and morally positive in Lawrence Kohlberg's universalizing sense of an evolutionary morality. The alternative possibility, the idea that humanity's moral progress is a historical product and not an evolutionary endowment, is dismissed as being Hobbesian, or in the words of a famous primatologist, Franz de Waal, that this rejected view is a fallacious veneer theory of human nature promoted by people like Sigmund Freud and Norbert Elias. That's the end of part one. Time for part two, and I conclude part two with two questions. The first question concerns the credibility of the human mirror neuron system, which plays such a key role in this dialectic. Unfortunately, there's not enough time for that. That would take long and perhaps not so interesting to everyone. So I want to skip to the second question and to return to Maynard Smith's original interest in a fully reductionist Neo-Darwinian account of human evolution. And the second question concerns dualism between mind and brain. And we need to distinguish, before going any further, between two kinds of dualism. First of all, there's substance dualism. This was Descartes' vision, of course, of the body and the soul having two essentially different substances. Put that aside, there's a second kind of dualism, and that's the one that most of us believe in today, and the one that Maynard Smith was arguing against. And this is called philosophers refer to it often as property dualism. And property dualism has no problem accepting the fact that the mind has a material substratum, and that is the brain. And goes on to say, however, that mind and brain are concomitant. That is to say, they go together, but are not reducible to one another. Events occurring in the brain obviously can affect the mind, affect cognition, attention, and so on. However, the activities that we attribute to the mind cannot be reduced to brain structures and brain events in any precise, corresponding, matching, or meaningful way. To be successful, a reductionist account must overcome property dualism, and it must do this by discovering a mechanism that will bridge mind and brain and to make reductionism possible and to make the ghost of Maynard Smith happy. Jerry Fodor's a famous philosopher of mind. I'm sure many of you know who he is, and rather pessimistic on the overcoming the problem of property dualism. And he writes about cognitive science in a particularly nasty way. And he writes that cognitive science, and I should know as a philosopher of cognitive science, doesn't actually know how the mind works. And the fact is, I don't know how the mind works either, nor does anybody else know how the mind works. And I suspect that if God were to tell us how the mind works, none of us would even be able to understand him. End of the quote. Fodor's opposite number in this controversy is Daniel Dennett, a reductionist. A reductionist of the first rank, and really a philosopher in residence to Neo-Darwinian evolutionary science. And I'll condense this very much and tell you what his solution to the problem is. And his solution is that we should imagine within the mind that there is, in fact, a ghost in the machine, someone who's reading all the representations of the brain, but that we should recognize that this ghost is completely fictitious, a homunculus, but a fictitious homunculus that does this job for us as an inner self. But it's a homunculus that's on top of a pyramid of other homunculi. And the next level down is composed of more stupid homunculi, and each one of which corresponds to one of the functions that is performed by the homunculus, the inner self, at the top. At the next level down, there are even more stupid homunculi, each corresponding to one of the functions performed by the homunculus it serves. And thus, the operations needed for reading representations, inferring intentions, are progressively decomposed into functions, each of which is being performed by an imaginary homunculus. But eventually, the system will bottom out, Dennett says, in this thought experiment, with millions of homunculi that are so stupid and so simple in what they perform that they can be replaced by machines or robots. And at this level, once it is bottomed out, we will have found, we've discovered the mechanisms that will permit us to dispense with the mind and the proxies for the mind in the neuroscience literature. They will be gone, all gone, broken down, he writes, into subcomponents that are themselves clearly just unconscious under-laborers, which themselves work without any supervision from the top. My concluding paragraph is the question: are robots up to the job to do this? What do we know about robots? My question is not rhetorical, but empirical. What do we know about robots? What can a robot do? Is Dennett's faith in robots realistic? What does research on robotic intelligence tell us about their abilities? According to many experts amongst the people in this community, robots comparable to animals must be able to, if they're going to be comparable to animals, must be able to respond to unanticipated and paradoxical situations. They call this the complexity barrier. And so far, all robots everywhere have failed to penetrate this barrier. The most successful robot so far is in Japan, and it's a hybrid omnidirectional six-legged robot that can move all around and can do exactly this sort of beyond the complexity barrier, respond to unanticipated and paradoxical conclusions. How does it do it? It's got a driver, and the driver is an amoeba, a slime mold. The slime mold inside this device guides the robot's movement via an interaction loop between the external environment and the multinuclei in the amoeba. Within this cell, we are told by the researchers, there's a continuous negotiation that's taking place amongst the nuclei. Decision-making affects the intracellular reconfiguration on the micro scale, and as a consequence, the global behavior of the whole cell on the macro scale. This, in turn, affects changes in the electrical circuit governing a tiny motor, and by this means, the slime mold is able to move from place to place and overcome unanticipated movements. The question that we end with, how did the slime mold get so smart? We have a clue in my account of the evolution of mental time travel. And it is the point where, okay, just finishing now. Okay, I'm very sorry. Okay, it has to do with memory and the point where I spoke about memory and the attribution of episodic memory to slime molds. And yes, so let me just finish there. So the answer is, where did they get so smart? Have we made the bridge? The answer is no. And I apologize for taking so long.